How do I figure out what's next in my career? How do I align my work with what truly matters to me? And the biggest question of all, can I really design a career that I love? Hey, my name is Jen Smith, and I believe career success doesn't have to come at the expense of living a radiantly happy and healthy lifestyle. As a former HR leader and recruiter turned career coach, I've seen how traditional paths can leave people burned out or boxed in. And I know there's a better way, one that invites you to let go of outdated rules and outside expectations, one that evolves and supports meaningful growth over time. Whether you're feeling stuck, craving more clarity, or ready to expand within your current role and beyond, this show is for you. So grab your coffee or your kombucha, pull up a seat, and get ready to explore practical, modern strategies for building a meaningful, heart-based career. Because you deserve a long, radiantly happy, and healthy career. This is the Flourish Careers Podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Jen Smith, and if this is your first time here, you've landed in the middle of something fun. This is season 12 of the Flourish Careers Podcast, and we're counting down your top 12 most listened episodes of all time. Each week, I'm adding a fresh intro to each episode, what I've learned since recording it, why I think it resonated, and one 5 minutes to flourish tiny action to help you apply the insight right now. Think of this as a seasonal reset, revisiting the guidance that supported listeners through moments of growth, transition, and renewal, and hearing it in a new light. We're also celebrating with a giveaway. All you have to do is leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, tell me what you love about the show, screenshot it and send it my way, or tag me on social. From there, I will send you a link for a complimentary in-season planner, which is perfect for a reset. So here we are at number 8. And coming in at number 8 is Should You Discuss Your Salary at Work with Yolanda Owens. Salary transparency is still one of the most emotionally charged topics in the workplace. And this conversation with career coach Yolanda Owens keeps finding new listeners because there's so much to talk about other than numbers. It's about worth, fairness, and trust. Yolanda and I dig into why talking about money at work feels so taboo, how to approach salary conversations with confidence and curiosity rather than comparison or conflict, and what real transparency looks like for employees and employers. Revisiting this episode reminded me that the discomfort around money talk hasn't gone away. It has evolved. We are bolder about wanting transparency, but we're still unsure about how to navigate it in real time. And Yolanda's guidance is as relevant today as ever. So for your 5 minutes to flourish tiny action, go ahead and jot down your compensation non-negotiables. When you know your number and your worth, the conversation gets a whole lot easier. Here's the episode. Hello and welcome back to the Flourish Careers Podcast. I'm Jen Smith, your host, and today I'm thrilled to be here for another installment of Flourishing Together, a monthly segment dedicated to curated conversations with industry insiders sharing wisdom and strategies for improving your work and well-being. Today, I am delighted to welcome Yolanda Owens back to the show. We had so much fun chatting about all things insider secrets from a recruiter perspective. We decided to do it again. And today we are discussing a hot topic, which is salary transparency. Now, if you're not familiar with Yolanda, you should be. She is a career coach, an award-winning author of the book, How to Score a Date with Your Potential Employer. She's the founder of Career Sensei Consulting and a former corporate recruiter. Yolanda has 20 years of recruiting knowledge and tricks of the trade, which you can find featured in publications like Forbes, Newsweek, The Muse, CBS News, USA Today, and the New York Post. She shares her knowledge of what employers truly seek in potential candidates from a recruiter's lens. Yolanda, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yes. And I'm thrilled to talk about this topic of salary transparency. It's definitely gained traction in recent years. And I feel like, at least when I was in the workplace, talking about salary was considered taboo, which has changed a lot. So in your experience, what are some of the pros and cons of discussing salaries at work or with your coworkers?
Oh, goodness. First of all, I'm having a total Jerry Maguire moment right now. Show me the money.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, there are pros and cons to sharing it. Pros, I think the biggest pro we've seen to it is seeing states pass legislation that you have to share salary information and job postings now.
Yes.
I think that's probably been the biggest win in that. The second is, you don't want to have to just rely on your negotiating skills, because I'd never get anything if that were the
Same.
case. And then, the discretion of a manager, because if you have a manager who doesn't like you, you're screwed.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen for you. So being able to have that transparency and to have some self-advocacy and transparency, that's really, really important. So that's the biggest pro. I would say the biggest con is that it can make for some really funky work situations.
Definitely.
You don't want to go into work feeling, some kind of way about your coworker, having some sort of envy. And then it can also make for some really weird power dynamics as well in the workplace. So those are some cons. And, you have to work with these people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So, it could cause some friction. Salaries break up relationships all the time, and the workplace is no exclusion to that. So, those are some of the cons as well.
Yeah, you bring up some really great points. And the first one, I'm so glad you mentioned the legislation around the salary transparency and job descriptions, because it's so helpful for job seekers to at least know if they're in the ballpark before going down and wasting anyone's time. When I was a recruiter, I don't know about you, but that would be one of the first questions I would ask people in a phone screen is, hey, this is the range for this position. Is that acceptable to you? Before we even move on. And now that can happen if it's in the job description. It can happen even sooner, which allows both sides to make the most informed decisions. So yeah, kudos to the states that have gone and put that in the job description. It's super helpful for, like I said, for both sides. And then the other thing on the con side, there, in my mind, just from an HR standpoint, there's like the potential for a lot of misinterpretation too. Like when people share things, because there's a lot of other things that go into a compensation picture versus just a raw number. And if folks are sharing just raw numbers, that can just lead to misunderstandings. And like you said, awkwardness, resentment, all of the things. So I always encourage folks to just consider other things. And it's not just benefits that everybody gets, but there are things like, tenure, experience, internal equity. There's a lot that goes into these compensation discussions. And not to mention, every company has a different compensation philosophy. So some are pay for performance, some aren't. So there's a lot to take into consideration. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You can't go by the raw data, because the raw numbers, because that doesn't tell the complete story. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. Yeah. I saw something out there in the interwebs, and it said something around organizations striving for informed transparency. So things like providing the ranges for different jobs, making sure your employees know the compensation structures, fostering open dialogue. And I really liked that. I really liked the idea of informed transparency.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because, you need to be able to make informed decisions on your finances, and your salary is the biggest piece of that. So I never understood why having discussions about salary was so taboo. I was just like, no, that should be part of the conversation. If you're talking about financial goals and financial security, that's probably the biggest piece.
That's why we work.
So you need to understand how that works, so you can bake that into other things that you're doing in terms of your financial decisions. So
exactly. I always tell people, I'm like, nobody works for free. Like it has to be part of the conversation. So
yeah. And I'm a big advocate for individuals baking that into their performance goals. When you're talking about your performance goals, it just shouldn't be about your learnings, challenges, how you want to advance yourself. It should be about how you want to advance yourself also financially. So
Absolutely.
Putting your personal finance goals in that, I encourage people to do that because that is part of your goals. I mean, so if you bake that into that and have that conversation on a regular basis, there's no surprises. And your manager's, aware that that's part of something that's important to you for you advancing your career, and also to feel productive and purposeful at the end of the day.
Yes, that's a great point. I think time and place is a big piece of these conversations, which we'll probably talk about in a little bit, but you're right. And if it's just a normal part of the agenda when you're having a performance conversation, hopefully that's more than just once a year. I always recommend at least quarterly having these check-ins and these conversations, and then tying that to the work that you've done and what you've brought to the table can also generate a conversation versus somebody just feeling entitled or having a conversation with a coworker, not really understanding the backstory and getting emotional about it, but tying it back to that performance conversation, making it a regular part of your work experience and tying it to your personal goal and sharing those personal goals with your manager. That's a great idea, just to let them know like, hey, this is top of mind and here's what, I'm excited about. Here's what I'm going to contribute in order to continue to increase my salary in a way that's going to work with my lifestyle. So,
yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the conversations that can cause tension. So how can folks navigate these conversations without causing unnecessary tension or awkwardness among teams?
Yeah, I think my favorite phrase is understanding the why.
Ooh.
So instead of getting emotional or taking it personally, understanding the why behind it, because there's like we said before, there's a lot of factors behind that. So did that person negotiate their salary? If so, be like, hey, how did you do it? Because I want to do that too.
Yeah.
So did they negotiate? Perhaps they were poached from another company that was a competitor. So, they were a hot commodity. It could be that they're living in a different geographic location. So that could play a role in, how much they're making as well. When were they hired? Were they hired before you, after you? If they were hired, after you, it could be, that they got a higher salary because things have changed. If you've been there for 15 years and they came in, tomorrow, there's going to be a difference there. So like we said before, there are a lot of variables that go into these, making these decisions. So before you, go and try to put sugar in their tank, their gas tank, ask yourself, take a step back and understand the why. Oh, wow. Just like, how did you go about that? Did you negotiate the salary or, when were you hired? Where's home base for you? Understanding some of those variables before, you get all up in arms.
Yes. One of the things that I'm just kind of hearing here is the word curiosity is coming to mind. So like approaching the conversation with curiosity versus a comparison that can allow for a conversation versus a you versus me kind of thing. And I'm glad you brought up all those variables again. I remember working as a recruiter and seeing the different geographies and the pay differences. And it's pretty significant. Like San Francisco, New York City, Boston, some of these cities, because the cost of living is so high, they're going to have a higher salary or else they'll never be able to attract top talent to the organization. So now I know some of these rules and some companies have changed this with remote work and working wherever you want and things like that. So it's not as black and white as it used to be, but it's a really big factor in considering salary. So, so maybe you could say something like, I'm trying to understand rates, market rates for our role. Are you open to sharing or have you come across any salary data? Like that curiosity-based question might feel a little more open for folks to have a discussion versus, that emotional kind of response that comes to it. So just that curiosity, I think, is really important. Now, one argument for salary transparency is that it helps uncover pay disparities. So have you seen evidence that salary discussions can lead to fairer practice? Or maybe you have a story from your recruiter's perspective?
I do. I have stories on both sides of that. So I have seen where it has put up the defense mechanisms, and I've seen where it's actually, caused some changes. So I remember I had one job where my boss, who was a VP, discovered that some of the younger coworkers were discussing their salaries, and she blew her top. She was just like, this can't be happening. Oh my goodness, this is really going to mess up everything. And so, she and I had a conversation. I was just like, younger generation, that's what they do. I know you're of an older generation where that was kind of taboo, but that's no longer the case. So it led to a good discussion, but yeah, that was the initial response. And I was like, oh God.
Let me intervene.
Yeah. So I was just like, oh. So yeah, I think that mindset, and in some corporations, and it depends on the culture.
Yeah.
So, some cultures, they think that's still taboo and that shouldn't be a discussion happening. And although by law they're now allowed to stop those conversations, they can definitely make it uncomfortable for people to have those conversations. So I have seen that. On the other side of that, I also worked for a company where, again, I was working with young professionals, and those conversations were happening, and they actually revisited how they shared and how they went about their pay bands. So no longer was it, you just got whatever you got. There were conversations around those bands, and they actually revisited the bands and then had conversations with groups to let them know what the new structures were. So it ended up being a very, very productive, conversation around that, and a change in policy and how they hired and how they had those discussions. Wow. So like I said, I've seen both extremes.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, the conversation shines a light on what's going on, and it allows people in positions of power to have more informed conversations, or at least to have a better understanding of what's going on in their organization and what they're going to do to either, remedy it, or, whatever it is that they're going to do with it. But at least the conversations are happening.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points there. One of the things that came up as you were talking was the different generations in the workplace and how money was discussed or not discussed, throughout the generations. And we're in a time of change. We've been in a time of change with the workplace. Everything we know about work has literally been turned upside down. It's been happening over the last couple of years. And this is one of the things that has been changing pretty dramatically. And you're right, it is a culture piece of an organization. And the first example that you shared there, I could totally see that happening, where a leader is just freaking out because everyone's talking about salary. But it's so great that you were able to intervene and say, hey, let's use this as a teaching moment and, kind of get everybody on the same page and share our policies and our practices around pay and promotions and all of the things. And, the other thing that came up is change management. So what a great example of an organization taking a hold of having a pulse on the organization, taking a hold of that, and then making changes and doing it in a way where folks are involved and they are being transparent, and the change is happening in a very manageable and safe way versus, that culture of mistrust where people are behind closed doors and you never know what's happening. And it's like this big secret thing, which really can break trust in an organization. And if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Yeah. When they're doing things when you feel like we're doing things behind your back or in secrecy, or you feel like you can't speak about things without being reprimanded. Yeah, that's not a safe environment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think about too, like having the conversation also holds the employer accountable to building trust and, developing the culture where people do feel safe discussing salary. Because again, we don't work for free. Like that's the whole reason we're working, is to get paid and live our lives. And so if you don't hold your employer accountable to being fair and transparent about those discussions, there's something to be said there. So accountability, trust, culture. And then I think also I go back to those salary transparency laws. That's accountability too from a legislative perspective, which is a really big deal. And I'm proud of those states that are doing it. It seems like more and more folks are getting on board with it at this point. So
yeah, I think that's a game changer. I can remember myself, going on interviews, and I've had a few jobs where that wasn't the case, and you go through 5 rounds of interviews, and then you find out the salary is like $30,000 less than what you're making, and everybody's time's been wasted for weeks on end. So if nothing else, it's preventing that from happening.
Yes, exactly.
So that's a beautiful thing.
It is. And you actually got me thinking too about going to an interview and, for job seekers, if salary is not on the job description, being okay asking like, hey, I don't want to waste anyone's time. Like, what's the budget for this job, or what's the range that you have, for this role? I want to make sure that we're on the same page. It's okay to ask that question in an interview. Like I said, as a recruiter, I used to bring it up first. But if it's not, like, don't be afraid to ask that question.
Absolutely. Because again, you don't want to waste your time at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. Now, let's say you get into a salary discussion at work and you find out that you're making significantly less than a peer. What should you do?
Make sure that they pay for lunch the next time we go out.
Great call. Yes.
Absolutely make sure that that's happening. First of all, don't get mad at that person. Mm-hmm. It's not their fault. They don't know. The first thing, you don't want to blow up at that person. Secondly, do your due diligence and inform yourself. I would say my first course of action, have a conversation with your manager. I wouldn't name drop that person. I would have a conversation and be like, hey, it's my understanding that there are, people who are in my same peer group or in my same job title that are, making significantly more. Is there, can we have a conversation on reevaluating my salary?
Great.
And then, I would also go to HR with your manager's blessing. Of course, you don't want to make sure you're not going behind anybody's back. But then having a conversation with HR to understand what those pay bands look like. Yeah. So you're having an informed conversation. When you do have that conversation with your manager, you're of the same understanding. And you can make a case for yourself once you understand that. So it's all about making an informed decision, not taking things personally, and absolutely not taking out on the person who's telling you that they're making more than you. Because again, that wasn't their call. It wasn't their decision. And they had nothing to do with that. So it's nothing personal against you.
Right. Take the emotion out, make them pay for lunch, and then get your case together and have a conversation with your manager. And I totally agree with HR as well. And the other thing too is like when you are making your case, bring data. Don't just go off emotion or what somebody told you. Bring the data. Go do the research based on the market and bring what you've brought to the table as well. So talk about your performance and how you've made an impact on the team and the organization. And that can lead to a really robust conversation around performance and understanding how salary fits into that. Now, another thing that I'm just thinking about here too. So I mentioned like the pay philosophy at the organization. I think that's a really big deal because some companies have a pay for performance. So I've worked at organizations where if you exceed your goals by a certain amount, you're almost guaranteed that higher bracket in terms of an increase versus folks that don't meet their goals don't get an increase. I've also worked for organizations where, hey, there's a budget for increases and everybody gets the same thing no matter what. So obviously there's pros and cons. We're not going to get into salary or compensation philosophies, but I think it's really important to understand your company's philosophy when it comes to salary and increases and promotions and all of those things.
Yeah. And to your point, if you're talking with a peer, just because they have the same job title or working in a similar department, if they're not within your company, that could be drastically different, just like you're saying. Yes. If you're working for a small to mid-sized company and they're working for a company that's behemoth that has 100,000 employees, there's going to be some discrepancies there just by nature. So like I said, you really have to do your digging and understand the market and make an informed decision before, getting in your feelings about that.
Yes. And you had mentioned something earlier too that stuck with me that ties to this is really about the competition. So depending on your industry, if you are living and working in a very competitive space, then you might be brought in at a higher rate than a peer because they need that specialized talent. That used to happen when I worked in an organization that was hiring very specific scientific backgrounds. Like we would pay for that talent. So, and it was very competitive. And so that's just another thing to, to consider as you're having these discussions and making the most informed decision. So if you do get into this, just to recap, approach the conversation professionally, back your case with data, focus on career growth, have some examples ready, talk to your manager and talk to HR to make sure you have all the information you need to make the most informed decision. So now for someone unsure, so on the other side of this, for someone unsure whether or not they want to discuss their salary with their coworkers, what questions maybe should they ask themselves before making the decision? Or maybe like if you come to me and want to talk about salary and I'm not really sure about that conversation, like how do I go about that without ruining the relationship?
Now, again, understanding the why. I would say to the person, I'm glad that you feel comfortable enough to come and ask me this question. Just so I can, make sure that I'm making an informed decision on how much to share with you. Why are you interested in this information? So understanding why they want that information and then figuring out what you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Because, you just don't want to go spilling everything right off the bat. You want to be selective in what you're sharing with individuals and also gauging your own comfort level. So you're not creating, a hostile, hostile situation. So just understanding why they want to know that and why they want that information. So again, you're making sure that you're giving them what they're looking for.
Yeah. And I would add to that too is this somebody that you trust? Is it somebody that you trust to have a constructive discussion? Or is it the office gossip person that's going to go around, turn your story 10 different directions and make something totally different up? You just don't know. So I would take that into consideration as well. Like hopefully the person that's approaching you is somebody that you would consider a colleague and that you want to have a constructive discussion, but let's be frank, not everybody's like that.
No. And also consider the culture of your organization. The culture of your organization was like what I was talking about, where that VP is going to blow up, finding out that people are talking about that. You may not want to go around, surveying people with about that kind of information. So, understand your culture and if that's frowned upon and understanding that before you stir the pot too much.
Yeah, for sure. And you definitely don't want to pressure anybody into disclosing. Okay. So, I was thinking too, if I were in this situation and I wasn't comfortable, maybe I'm new, and I don't really know enough about everybody just yet. And I'm just not comfortable sharing. You could say something like, with all due respect, I'm new here and, I just don't feel comfortable sharing that information just yet. Like maybe we can revisit it in a couple months, like once I understand the culture here. So, you want to just be respectful and also keep those boundaries. Like it's okay if you don't want to share. You're not ruining anyone's life by not sharing. It's just let them know in a really respectful and also be confident with your response. Like it's okay.
Yeah. No. It's just like I don't share my dress size or my salary with anybody.
Exactly. Some people are okay with it. Some people aren't. And you just have to be respectful and, note those boundaries. And also too, if you're the one asking and you can sense some hesitation in somebody, just be respectful of their privacy. And again, you don't want to pressure anyone and cause that uncomfortable work situation, especially if it's someone on your team and you have to interact with them all the time. Like you just want to be really careful there. So
yeah. Maybe preface it by saying it's okay if you say no to this, but wanted to ask.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. That's a really good way to bring it, make it non-confrontational. Like, hey, I totally understand if you're not comfortable with this, but here's what I'm kind of doing some research around this. And if you're open to sharing, or maybe they're open to sharing a range too. So maybe they don't have to give you exact numbers, but they're open to giving you some type of a range, that they're comfortable sharing. So So I think these are really good ideas. Any other like thoughts or recommendations when it comes to salary discussions and transparency at work?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that we didn't discuss is that, it could be that your manager or HR, whoever you're talking to, is open to having the salary discussion, but the discussion doesn't just have to be about salary. It could be that there's no budget for that. There's room for negotiation in other areas.
Yes.
So maybe you negotiate another week of vacation, or maybe you negotiating take one Friday off a month, or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of other things that can be negotiated if you don't get your salary request.
Yes.
So think about some of those things. It could be, they pay for your gym membership, or you get commuter costs, or a number of different things. So think about things that are important to you that you may be able to bring to the table that may be more feasible than, bumping up your salary 15%. So I just want people to know that there's other negotiables out there if salary is not in the range.
Yeah, that's a great call out. One of the things I remember actually having a conversation with somebody, this was a few years ago, actually 2 jobs ago, where they were asking about basically like trying to understand how to get a raise. And we got it, and I was in HR, and we got into a conversation around the why, why they wanted the raise. And it had to do with going back to school. They wanted more money to go back to school. And then I was like, wait a minute, we have tuition reimbursement. And that just changed the whole conversation.
Exactly.
So they were able to get, I think it was like 50%, or I don't even remember, but it was a good chunk of money that they were able to get reimbursed for, for continuing education. So it's a really good point. The other thing that always comes to mind here, especially if you're talking salary in the interview process, is sign-on bonuses.
Yes.
Huge. And it's easy for companies, at least in my experience, it's easy for companies to say yes to a sign-on, like a one-time lump sum, versus if you are asking for more salary and it's going to cause some type of internal equity issue. So instead of bringing you, in where it's going to cause some type of internal equity issue, they'll give you a lump sum to close whatever gap. Again, it's not ideal because it's not in your base, but it could be a good, nice bonus to get you in the door. So I always recommend to job seekers, like, it doesn't hurt to ask for some kind of sign-on bonus. And I've seen all the things happening with sign-on bonuses, from a couple grand to a lot of grand. So it's always something to consider.
Or paying for your relocation. And I think since the pandemic, we've seen a lot too, retention bonuses as well. That's a new thing that I've heard, that's become more popular, that they don't want to lose good talent. So in order to retain you, they may pay you, a retention bonus. So there's a lot of things that can be negotiated if, like I said, your base salary is out of the question. Start asking questions. And going back to what I was saying earlier, it's all about understanding the why. If you understand the why, then the negotiating and the understanding and meeting people where they are is so much easier.
One thing that just came to mind as you were saying that, like understanding the why on both sides. So you as an employer, a job seeker, what is your why around wanting this certain number? Is it so your kid can go to dance lessons? Is it because you want to go back to school? Is it because, this is the next step in your career? It doesn't matter. It's like, but for you, understanding what that why is. And I think that energy comes across in the conversations as well, versus, oh, my peer is making this, so I need to make this, right? So I think for you, you kind of like peeling back that onion and understanding your own why, and then also understanding where the employer is coming from in terms of their why, and bringing that together can be a really powerful conversation. Yeah. Really good points. Thank you for sharing. So as we come to a close here, do you have any recommendations on tools or resources employees or job seekers can reference when it comes to salary transparency?
I would say your HR department is probably your strongest line of defense, because they're the gatekeeper. When it comes to all of that in terms of the policies and what the wiggle room is. So having a conversation with them to truly understand what that means, I think that's your biggest defense against that.
Yeah, I agree. And then kind of some of the things we said before around industry benchmarking. There are a lot of salary tools out there, payscale.com, I think of Glassdoor. So there's a lot of tools out there that you can use to help you get an understanding of kind of the market research and the market trends. But yeah, maybe a combination of HR departments, understanding policies and philosophies inside a company, salary benchmarking tools, industry reports, all of these things will give you a lot of really good data points and information to have the conversation. So
yes, and understanding your why.
Yes, and your why, both sides the why. I think that's really critical. I appreciate you bringing that to the table today. Well, this has been really helpful. I'm excited for listeners to hear our conversation today, Yolanda. So remind us, if folks would like more Yolanda wisdom, where can people find you online?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram at Career Sensei. And then you can also find me on my website, careersensei.com or yolandaowens.com.
Excellent. And I encourage folks to follow Yolanda, especially I follow Yolanda on LinkedIn, and she always, every day you post a very inspirational topic or quote, and it's super fun. So if you're looking for a little inspiration, definitely connect with her over on the socials. So Yolanda, thank you so much for joining me today and shedding light on the complexities of salary transparency. This is a very crucial topic and something that continues to evolve. So I look forward to being informed, I guess, on this evolving trend. And your insights have been very invaluable. And it's a pleasure, as always, having this conversation with you.
Likewise, thank you so much for the opportunity to have some giggles and conversation with you. It's always so much fun.
Always so much fun. And listeners, as always, the notes from today's episode will be on the blog at flourish.careers/blog. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.